Al, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Wimborne, Lowestoft, and now Norwich.
Yes, don't get me started on tour routing. Wimborne to Lowestoft is further than you might think.
Yeah.
It's a very long way. We've had two ludicrous long legs on this tour. I mean, that one I suppose is broken. I live in London, so that one was broken up by London. But I've got white line fever at the moment. I'm really fed up with being in the car. But there you go. What can you do?
But pleasure to be here in Norwich.
Oh yeah, and it's always. And we were saying when we got here how much I like playing this theatre and what fun we always have at the Theatre Royal. So.
And thank you for joining us just before you go on stage.
That's all right.
Now, are you ready for these questions?
I don't know.
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one, stage presence.
Yes.
Who or what has been your greatest influence in the performing arts?
Oh, gosh, that's a difficult question. But I think the first person who really struck me as a performer, when I was 19 is when I started getting interested in actually doing comedy, because I didn't know you could. I didn't know it didn't exist, and it's not like now where there are courses and you can study at uni and all that sort of thing. It just didn't. There were people on the telly who did it, but they had those jobs. It didn't feel like a thing you could do, and I didn't know about the comedy circuit and all that sort of thing. But the person who I really got into when I was kind of 19 and I watched his video over and over and over again was Steve Martin, because he was a big film star. He'd made Roxanne, I think, in like 1986, and it was a massive hit. And he'd done his sort of odder films before that, and that was his sort of breakout big romantic comedy. So he'd done Man with Two Brains, and The Jerk was his first movie and all that sort of stuff. But there's a video of him doing stand-up at the Hollywood Bowl, live at the Hollywood Bowl, 1979 or 77, which is just before he gave up stand-up. And there's just something really electric about his performance and his clearly his approach to performance. And he's written about it since, and it's all really interesting. So I think Steve Martin was the sort of proper light bulb for me of how you could approach stand-up and think about how you use your whole body in the performance and not just hold a mic like this and talk. And so Steve Martin, I'd say.
And you're someone that, you use a lot of mediums as well. You're a musician too, and Steve Martin's got that kind of...
Well, yes, and he's a banjo player or a banjo-lele or whatever. Banjo players or ukulele players always get really angry if you get the name of their instrument wrong. And I saw him actually but it was quite a while ago now, about 8 years ago, when he brought that bluegrass band he had over. Saw him at Hammersmith Apollo, and I never will have got to see him do stand-up, but to see him perform, and he was so funny because his exactitude with words is really interesting, and he's also just his sort of timing is really superb. But it's not just how he speaks; everything about him is encapsulated in his timing. So I have seen him live, kind of. So. That was a wonderful thing.
Bucket list moment.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I think having heroes when you're into performing and all that sort of thing is actually really healthy and really good for you. And having people, I mean, obviously what you don't do is copy them, but think about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they've arrived at it, and think about its ancestry and all that sort of thing, and the tradition it's from and all that sort of thing. And having heroes is fine, I think, is cool.
Okay, so the next question.
Yeah.
All the world's a stage.
Yes.
What has been your favourite place to perform?
Oh, well, apart from Norwich Theatre Royal.
Apart from Norwich Theatre Royal, thank you for that.
There's a theatrical architect, a guy called Frank Matcham. People who know about theatres know who Frank Matcham is. Matchless Matcham. And there's, I think, a dozen, I can never remember how many theatres it is in the UK that he built. And he obviously reached a point where he came up with what we'd call an algorithm for the perfect proportions for a room. And there's there's the King's Theatre in Glasgow. It's really big. It's like a 2,000-seater, but it works as a performer. You stand at the same place on the stage as you do in. Oh God, where's the other? My mind's gone blank as to where the others are, but in the other ones that are different sizes and they work exactly the same way. Everyone can see, everyone can hear you. And so it's theatres like that, but the very best place to play is Leeds City Varieties, which is a music hall. from the Victorian era that's been, that got saved by English heritage. And the good old days used to be on this. There was a TV programme in the 70s where they would do music hall. And that, for what I do, I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, for what I do, that is the absolute perfect environment. The stage isn't very large. It's quite a rake on it as well. So you're always feeling like you're being pitched into the audience. And there's a box there, and you can go over and talk to the people in the box like that, rather than in a normal theatre where the box would be all the way over there. And there's just something about it, and the sort of heat of the room and the energy of the room. For someone who does what I do, is like a sort of perfect feedback loop. So I'd say that's probably my favourite place to play. Or Bath Theatre Royal, Brighton Theatre Royal is a matchroom theatre. They're just, the Victorians really, really had it figured out. And, and it's a time before amplified music or amplified speech. So they had to figure it out. They had to figure out how you stood in the middle could be heard right at the back. And it's that sort of intimacy that's really exciting.
Okay, so the next question, stage fright. What has been the toughest moment of your career?
Easily the toughest moment of my career was the third Royal Variety performance I did where I'd lost my voice. And you can't pull out of that show because it's sort of like, it's sort of like when they launch a ship and they let go of the chocks or whatever that's holding the ship in place, and it comes down the slipway. And once they've let the thing go, they can't, because the comics all perform in front of tabs, so that they're striking whatever was on before, and they're setting up whatever's on next. So they're striking, 42nd Street, and they're setting Bon Jovi or whatever, and you're in front of tabs, and that's the job of the comics. And I'd done it twice before, and it had gone really, really, really well. But this third time, it was in Liverpool, and I lost my voice. And I'm talking like this, and it was a disaster. And a really, really horrible experience. And, I did bad. I went badly. It was no good. It was no good. It's not one of those gigs where you die and you go, well, I didn't do anything wrong. It was no good. I was no good. It was no good. And it's one of those ones where you're just caught in the crosshairs of the bloody thing. There's nothing you can do about it. And the Queen's over there. It's quite. So that I would, hands down.
Did you get any feedback on that at all?
No, not really. You had people afterwards going, "Oh, bad luck, mate." But what tends to happen if someone has a bad one at a gig like that is everyone avoids them. It's sort of like the stink of failures. Has to be. You have to keep your distance. It's about 10 years ago that I think, I think it was 10 years ago, and it was awful. It was awful at the time. Awful in the afternoon in the anticipation because my voice was getting worse and worse. And I thought, maybe I'll be all right, gargling Manuka honey and steaming and everything. Maybe I'll be okay. And I wasn't. And there you go. Okay,
so the next question.
Yeah.
Centre stage.
Yes.
What has been the moment that you feel defines you as an artist?
Oh, God. That's really difficult. There was a moment, there was a show, because I did 4 Edinburgh runs when I came up with the Pub Landlord, and I got nominated for the Perrier Award each time. And the first show was like me just trying an hour of the character, and it worked. So tick that box, job done. The second one was like, right, how do I write a fresh hour, and not just an hour of material that I've been doing in comedy clubs all cobbled together, and sat down and wrote a show, and that worked. And then you're thinking, right, this really does work, right? And I can write for this, it's going places. And the third show I sort of built on what I'd done in the third one, and it was getting more and more complex, and I was really aware. And very often with writing, David Chase of The Sopranos, a guy who created The Sopranos, he says, people go, oh, you put that in there because of this and all that. And he goes, no, very often you're in the writer's room, and it's the idea you've got. You've got to write a program, you've got to write a thing, and that's the idea you've got, so you're stuck with it. It's not that you're trying to say this, that there's a better idea you could have used, because if you'd had a better idea, you would have used it. And the third of these 4 Edinburgh shows was very much complicated because I was wearing my brains on my sleeve in the storytelling and all that sort of thing. And then the 4th one, I thought, God, I went to a lot of trouble last year. Just simplify the whole thing. Strip it right back down. What are the core ideas at work in here, and how do you make them speak. You know, strip it out, make it simpler. Keep it simple, stupid, that idea, the KISS. And that was the best show I'd ever written by a long way. And this the show that won the Perrier Award for what it was worth. But that was a big revelation for me, was that very often the smartest thing to do is to not worry about being smart. And that if you've got a direct, simple idea, be simply direct with it. And all those things. And the rest will come. And you know, I was sort of worrying about, before that, I've been very much worrying about what my peers thought and all that sort of thing, you know, because there were lots of really ambitious, clever people writing in the 90s doing stand-up and coming up with their own voice. So you want to be part of that and you want to push at that. And then I realised that actually that was causing me loads of problems, and it would be simpler to be simple, because the characters it's a very simple character, really. It's a very, very simple idea. So deliver it simply. And that then led, so I think 99 was the year I had a proper light bulb about that, and it all got easier after that, and writing it got much, much easier, and adding and extending and sitting down and writing a new show just became much more sort of natural. So I think that's probably the moment you're asking me about, but I don't know.
And I just wanted to ask, do you feel like the character has evolved at all over the years, or do you think that the environment in which surrounds the character has changed?
Both. I mean, 10 years ago, we were doing this talk show on ITV, and so suddenly before that I'd done a sitcom on Sky, so you're not exposed to the mainstream at all. And also what we were trying to do with that was very much against the grain at the time of stuff like The Office, which was single camera and very low key. You know, we were trying to make a big, broad audience sitcom, but it was on Sky, so you know, no one saw it, but it didn't get the kind of exposure that doing a thing on the Friday and Saturday night on ITV, massive exposure. So suddenly you've got how people are seeing the character. They're making up their own minds about what you're doing. There's nothing you can do about that, right? Which is, I think, fun anyway, and then persuading them of what you're doing by them coming and see you live, you know. Because we suddenly had a load more people coming to see me live. So what you have to do with the character is take that on board. So what I've done with the character is he's aware that he's like famous. He's aware that people have come to see him. He's setting up his stall as the bloke with the common sense solutions to things, rather than the guy just telling you that he has. Because I think you know, and also at the moment we're very much in an age where there's all these people telling us they have simple solutions to everything, so it sort of fits. And the tour we did in 2009, I very much made it him going, don't worry, I've got, you know, don't panic, help's here, the answers are here. And that's the thing that really has evolved with the character in the last 10 years, and you know, and ended up with me running for Parliament in 2015 in character, because that's the extension of that idea. And yeah, so the character has evolved and the surroundings have changed. So the surroundings are, you're better known, you've got a bigger audience, you've got more people misunderstanding what you're doing, more people understanding what you're doing in equal measure, and the misunderstanding, rather than being a thing that's ever bothered me, always strikes me as an opportunity for mischief, as an opportunity, is another joke. And comics are meant to be agents of misrule and confusion and mischief and all that, I think. So I don't kind of mind if people don't understand what's going on or get the wrong end of the stick. That's fine, you know. So yeah, there's been these two pieces of evolution, and I actually think that making him know he's famous is a good reaction to the change in the audience environment. You know, but I think that's it really. I mean, but the last 10 years I've really worked on him knowing that he's known. Because otherwise, what's going on in the theatre is sort of bogus. I mean, I know I'm in character, I know it's bogus, but you've got to have him react honestly to the situation, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. Okay, so the next question. Stagehand. What piece of advice would you give somebody wanting to pursue a career like yours?
That's pretty simple. If you want to be a stand-up comic, you've got the only place you can learn how to be a stand-up comic is stage time. That's why I got into it. That's why I got into stand-up, because I'd done a lot of acting at school. I wanted to perform. Thought I wanted to act, really. And when I got to university, I knew that if I went for an audition and failed the audition, right, my ego wouldn't be able to cope with it, because it would be an audition for a student director who knew as little as me, right? Because I knew nothing, and I'd think, well, you know nothing as well. Could cope with the teacher not casting me in the thing, right? I could cope with with authority in that situation, but not with one of my peers, because I knew. So stand up then, but the difference with stand up is you get in front of an audience and you either pass or fail the audition. Then and there, there's no interface. And there was a scene at Oxford at uni where you could just get in front of an audience and do it. And then you'd go away and you write a sketch for next week and you get in front of an audience and do it. And that's why I think in the end the best advice is to stage time. So if you want to be a comic, the best way to get stage time is to compare, because no one wants to compare. And if you're comparing, you open the show, you're on in the middle, you're on near the end, and then you close the show. So you get to experience all four versions of what comics have to deal with, opening, closing, and being on in the middle, and all those things. So you have to manage the audience properly, which all comedians in the end have to do. And you have to make it feel like tonight's the night, which again is a thing stand-ups in the end have to grasp as a thing they have to do. So that's what I'd suggest. And write everything down, save everything. Write and save absolutely everything that comes into your head, because you never know. You never know that you might find a way of, a joke you wrote 5 years ago, you might go back, look at it and find a way of making it work once you've figured out how to perform. Because you've two voices, your writing voice and your performing voice, and what you need is to get them to coincide. And there's only one, if the only way to get your performing voice together is stage time, then the only way to get your writing voice together is writing time. And this is a writing job principally. You spend much more time writing stand-up than you do performing it, in my experience. And I sort of became obsessive about writing at one point and really treated it as a muscle. And I'd write to a friend and say, give me a dozen subjects you want me to talk about on stage, and then I'd write a dozen things for each of the dozen, and then you'd throw it all out. But you've done the exercise, you've done the work. So write and stage time.
Okay. And the final question.
Yep.
The next stage. What does the future hold for Al Murray?
Well, that's a funny question. I ran into Jimmy Carr once, and we were comparing notes about interviews and stuff, and he says, people always say, well, what next? And he says, this. More of this, the same. That's what's next. I'm going to carry on. I'm not going to retrain as a physio or something. This. So this basically, but I've got lots of other things going on. So this tour runs to the kind of middle of July, and then I think we're going back out in the autumn again, which will probably flip over into the new year. Although this show is very event sensitive, because a lot of it's about the B word, unfortunately. So what happens in October will affect what's the content, but that's all right. I'm going to Edinburgh, so the Fringe. I have a band, so I'm playing music, and we've got more of that in the autumn. And I've got a company that makes drum kits and drums, and so that to sort of keep an eye on. So lots and lots of different things, and some telly in the always telly in the pipeline that you can't talk about, because if it doesn't happen, you look like an idiot.
Okay, so that is the end of those questions. How did you find them?
Oh, that's all pretty straightforward. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because sometimes things evolve rather than there's a crystalline moment, and very often where you are now wouldn't be as it is without all those things. But there isn't necessarily, I couldn't tell you for sure the moment where. I mean, there's a moment where you get in a taxi as a comic and you feel you can say to the cab driver that you're a comedian, right? And that is, I always think that's the moment. I imagine actors have the same thing as well, that for a very long time you aren't getting work, or no one notices. And you do want to be noticed, you do want to be recognised, you do want to break through. So I guess it's the moment you can look a cab driver in the eye and say you're a comedian is the moment.
Wonderful, thank you. And just before you go, obviously I'm afraid we can't talk about tonight's performance at Norwich Theatre Royal, because one, when people see this, it will be gone.
Yes.
And two, it's sold out.
Yes.
But if people do want more of Al in their lives.
Yes.
Where can they go?
Oh God, where are we next week? Birmingham, Stoke, Cheltenham. That's what we're doing next week. We've got 3 shows in Cheltenham. We've got matinee on Saturday in Cheltenham next week, and then I can't remember where we are the week after that, because I tend not to remember the schedule because it makes me miserable. Not the shows, just the travel. It's the travel is really doing my head in at the moment.
Well, Al, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.